Emma stepped out of the bookstore just as the sky opened up. Rain poured down in thin, slanted sheets, drenching the pavement and sending small streams of water racing toward the curb. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her, wishing she had brought an umbrella, her feet squished in her worn sneakers as she hurried down the street. Her thoughts on the pile of bills waiting at home and the emptiness in her stomach. She had worked a double shift that day, shelving dusty old paperbacks and helping customers find just the right story to escape into. Now, hungry and tired, she had only enough coins left for a cup of coffee, nothing more. A block ahead, a small cafe glowed warmly through the rain. The steamy windows showed people huddled inside, sipping lattes and nibbling pastries. Emma's mouth watered at the sight of the display case, filled with sandwiches and soup. She paused under the awning and peered in, her breath fogging a small patch of glass. She counted the coins in her pocket against quarters, for dimes, and a handful of pennies. She could almost see the numbers adding up to the exact price of a latte. But she was $1 short of buying even a simple tuna melt. She sighed and pulled the cafe door open. The bell above tinkled and she brushed raindrops from her hair. The warmth and the smell of fresh bread made her feel comforted. She shuffled to the back of the line, holding her coffee cup under the steam wand to warm her fingers. The barista, a friendly woman with bright eyes, greeted Emma with a smile. "Busy afternoon, huh?" Emma nodded, her words catching on a hiccup of sudden embarrassment. "Yeah, I just want a small latte." Her cheeks warmed. The barista tapped the cup and started steaming milk. Emma shifted from one foot to the other, trying to ignore the rumble in her stomach. Then, a polite voice sounded behind her. "Excuse me, do you mind if I let her go first?" Emma turned to see a man in a neat gray suit holding a briefcase in one hand. His shoes were polished, his tie exactly straight, and he looked like he had just stepped out of an office. Rain dripped off his jacket onto the tiled floor. He offered Emma a gentle smile. "It's no problem," the barista said, stepping aside. "Go ahead." Emma shook her head quickly. "No, I thank you, but I don't want to hold you up." She managed a small laugh, though her stomach tightened. She really just wanted to pay for her own coffee, but the man waved her forward. "Please," he said, kindness in his eyes. "It's nothing, I insist." With a silent shrug, Emma moved. Ahead, as she reached the counter, her heart sank when the barista tallied the cost. She set down her coins, lining them up on the counter. That'll be $1.90, the barista said, her tone gentle. Emma's fingers paused over the coins. She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm $1 short." Her voice was thin, but she could feel her embarrassment like a weight in her chest. She looked down, cheeks burning. The barista opened her mouth as if to say something kind, but before she could speak, the suited man slid forward.
"Here,"
he said, placing a crisp $1 bill on the counter. "I've got this," Emma looked up, stunned. "I can pay you back," she said, reaching for her phone. He shook his head. "Really, no worries. Consider it a small kindness." She tried to offer him the money back, but he smiled and tucked it into his wallet. "Just pay it forward when you can." Emma wrapped her hands around the warm cup. As he stepped aside, her lips trembled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, meaning the words from the bottom of her heart. He waved lightly and turned to place his own order. Emma found an empty table near the window, the raindrops racing each other down the glass. She sat sipping her latte and feeling the warmth spread through her. Outside, the rain reflected the streetlights, creating a soft glow around every puddle. Inside, the cafe felt like a cozy cocoon. She watched the man as he moved to the counter. To pay, he looked up, caught her eye, and gave a small nod before turning away. Emma felt a flutter of something, that stir of connection that sometimes arrives when you least expect it. She wondered who he was, where he came from, why he had been so kind. After a few moments, the barista brought Emma a small plate with a half sandwich she hadn't even ordered. He must have covered that too, she realized, and her eyes filled with tears. She touched the edge of the plate, careful not to slurp her latte too loudly. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured quietly to herself, but a warmth filled her chest despite her tiredness. The rain lightened into a drizzle, and people began to leave the cafe. Emma finished her latte, leaving her empty mug on the table. She glanced around, hoping to catch another glimpse of the man who had been so generous. He was still there, waiting by the door. He caught her eye again and gestured toward the door as if asking if she was all right. Emma rose and tucked her book bag over her shoulder. She moved to the door, and he smiled. "You're sledding up out there," he said, voice calm like the lull after a storm. "Looks like you'll make it home without getting soaked." She laughed softly, a little self-consciously. "Thanks again," she said, stepping outside and pulling her hood over her hair. The drizzle had made the sidewalk slick, but she didn't mind. She tucked the half-eaten sandwich safely into her bag, thinking she would savor it when she got home. The man fell in step beside her. They walked together and continued to talk. He introduced himself as Jaden, an accountant at the firm down the street. Emma said her name, telling him she worked part-time at the bookstore and was saving up to open her own little shop one day. Jaden listened carefully, nodding at each detail, his interest genuine. They walked side by side under a shared awning until they reached Emma's apartment building. She paused at the entrance, feeling a pinch of hesitation about asking for his number. But before she could speak, he fished out a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "If you ever want to grab coffee on me this time, you can text me here." Emma took the card, her fingers brushing his. She looked at it and saw his neat handwriting spelling his name and phone number. She smiled, a bright, hopeful curl of lips. "I'd like that," she said. He nodded and tipped an imaginary hat. "Then it's a date." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emma at her door. Inside, she leaned against the frame, feeling as though she had just stepped into the first page of a new story one she never saw coming on that rainy afternoon. She unlocked her door and flicked on the light. The apartment was small and cozy, filled with stacks of books and sketches of bookstore layouts pinned to the wall. She set her bag down and stared. At the half sandwich lying across the table, she could almost taste the tuna and crisp lettuce again. But more than that, she tasted hope that small kindness could blossom into something more. Emma went to her desk, pulled out a notebook, and scribbled that today, something wonderful had happened. A stranger had paid for her lunch with his last dollar, and in doing so, he had given her something priceless, a reminder that kindness exists in unexpected places. She wrote down his name, Jaden, and under it, the words, "Maybe this is the start of a beautiful chapter." Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and the moon peeked through broken clouds. Emma gazed at it from her window, a quiet smile on her face. She did not know that the man she had just met would one day become her fiancé. She did not know that this brief moment would change her life forever. But in that moment, she believed in small miracles, and she believed in the power of a single act of kindness to shape one's entire story. Emma woke the next morning with a gentle buzz from her phone. She blinked at the screen and saw a message from Jaden. "Good morning, Emma. I hope your day starts as bright as your smile." She pressed a smile emoji back and felt warmth spread through her chest. All day, while she shelved books and rang up customers, she peeked at her phone whenever it vibrated. His messages were small and kind. He sent her a link to a poem he loved, and she replied with a short story she thought he might enjoy. That evening, Emma sat at her tiny kitchen table, the half sandwich from yesterday wrapped carefully in foil. She unwrapped it and nibbled a bit as she typed to Jaden, "Thank you again for lunch. I read the story you sent. It was beautiful." He answered quickly, "You're welcome. I loved your story suggestion too. Maybe we can discuss them over coffee tomorrow." "What?" She felt a thrill at the question. "I'd like that," she messaged, then watched as the double check marks turned blue. The next day, Emma closed the bookstore early and rushed to the same cafe where they met. The bell tinkled as she entered, and there he was, already seated with 2 steaming mugs. He stood and smiled, offering her the chair opposite. He said simply, as if Hi held everything they needed. They talked about the stories they had sent each other. Emma's voice grew animated as she described a character's journey in one of her favorite books. Jaden listened intently, nodding and asking questions. He told her about his work at the accounting firm and how numbers could tell stories too if you paid attention. Emma laughed at the idea of a spreadsheet having a plotline, but she understood his point. Everything has a story, even numbers. After coffee, Jaden walked Emma to the little park nearby. The air was cool, and the trees still held a few red and gold leaves. They sat on a bench, their shoes nearly touching. Jaden asked about her dream of owning a bookstore. Emma pictured a small shop with oak shelves, cozy chairs, and warm lamplight. She said she wanted a place where anyone could find comfort in. A story where people could come together to share ideas. "That's a wonderful dream," he said. "I'd happily be your first customer." She smiled and looked down at her hands, noticing how calm she felt around him. Over the next few days, they kept meeting. Sometimes in the cafe, sometimes for a walk by the river, and once at a weekend book sale on the town square. Each meeting felt comfortable, like talking to an old friend. Emma discovered Jaden loved the same summer camp she did as a child. He told a story about canoeing on a lake, and she realized she had canoed on that very same lake 20 years ago. They laughed at how odd it was that they had been so close, yet never met. One evening, Jaden surprised Emma with a paperback of her favorite poet's work. The cover was slightly creased, as if it had been loved before. "I found this at a second-hand shop," he said. "It reminded me of you." Emma held it carefully, tracing the letters of the title. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. As autumn deepened, the air grew crisp, and Emma found herself looking forward to their time together more than ever, she told herself. She was just enjoying good company, but her heart had begun to race whenever his name lit up her phone. Then one day a small challenge arose. Jaden mentioned a big audit at work that would keep him late for weeks. Emma didn't want to complain. She knew jobs were important, but she missed their easy afternoons. She decided to surprise him with lunch at his office. She packed a thermos of soup and a sandwich, and she walked through the drizzle to his building. He was surprised to see her. His tired eyes brightened when he took the food. "Emma, you didn't have to," he said, grateful. She shrugged and smiled. "I wanted to," she said. They ate at a small table in his office break room. She listened as he explained how the audit had uncovered unexpected errors. She offered encouragement and even helped him draft a simple checklist to organize his tasks. He looked at her with gratitude shining in his eyes. A few days later, Emma faced her own struggle. Her landlord called to say the lease on her dream storefront wouldn't be renewed. She had been months into planning when the news hit her like a brick. She sat at home, staring at the lease agreement on her desk, tears threatening. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jaden. "How was your day?" She stared at the screen, blinked, and typed back. "Not good. Can we talk?" He arrived 40 minutes. Later, brown paper bag in hand, he set down the bag gently and sat beside her on the couch. She told him about the lease. Her voice trembled as she said she didn't know what to do. He held her hand warmly. "You will find a way," he said, voice steady. He reminded her how many friends she had in town, how supportive the community was. He said he believed in her dream. Emma cried softly, leaning against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her and she felt safe. After a few minutes, they wiped their eyes and opened the paper bag. Inside was a fresh sandwich, 2 apples, and a thermos of tea. "For lunch tomorrow," he said. She laughed through her tears, grateful for his kindness. Their bond deepened through these trials. Emma felt herself trusting him more than she ever had another person. She told him stories from her childhood, of her mother reading to her at bedtime, of building pillow forts to hide from storms. Jaden shared memories of his grandmother teaching him to cook on Sunday mornings, of the pride he felt when he balanced his first set of books in college. They each learned new things about the other, small quirks that made them human. Now one clear night, Jaden invited Emma to a late poetry reading at a small theater. She arrived wearing a soft green sweater, her hair pulled back simply. He greeted her at the door and handed her a ticket. Inside the room was dim, a single spotlight on the stage. A poet stepped up and read verses that made Emma's heart ache with beauty. She glanced at Jaden and saw tears in his eyes. She reached for his hand and he held it tightly. After the reading, they walked outside under a sky full of stars. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. Jaden stopped and turned to Emma. He looked at her with a seriousness that made her breath catch. "Never felt this way before," he said quietly. "You've brought light into my life." Emma's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She took a breath and said softly, "I feel the same." They stood there, in the crisp night air, hands still joined. The world felt still around them, as if it too was holding its breath. For a moment, Emma closed her eyes, imagining how their hands would fit together one day. How their stories might merge into something new. As they walked back toward their cars, Jaden stopped again and bent to kiss her forehead. She smiled against his shoulder. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered. He kissed her temple and said, "Thank you for being you." When Emma got home, she wrote in her notebook, "Today I found someone who listens, someone who cares. I think this is more than a spark. I think this could be the start of something real." She closed her notebook and placed it on her bedside table, beside the book of poems he gave her. The simple gesture felt like a promise that their story would continue. Part by part, page by page, and that kindness had led her to something she never expected but had always hoped for. They spent the next morning sipping tea in Emma's living room, sunlight filtering through thin curtains. Jaden set the teacups on the coffee table, careful not to jostle the poems and sketches of Emma's dream bookstore. He settled beside her on the couch, tucking one leg under him. Emma handed him a plate of toast she'd made with jam. He bit into it and nodded, smiling at the sweet taste. "You make the best jam," he said. Emma's chest warmed. She'd learned to cook simple things inspired by her grandmother's recipes. Now she cooked for someone she cared about. After breakfast, they sat together at Emma's desk. She spread out blueprints for the bookstore, hand-drawn sketches of shelves, reading nooks, and a small stage for readings. Jaden leaned close to study them. He asked gentle questions. How many bookshelves would fit on that wall? Where would the counter go? Down. Emma pointed and described her vision, a place bright with morning light. Walls painted soft cream, wood floors varnished warm. She wanted cushions in the corners, fairy lights, and a tea station for customers. Jaden nodded thoughtfully, offered to help her make a budget spreadsheet. Emma beamed at his practical skill. They spent the morning counting costs and prices, mixing her creativity with his precision. In the afternoon, they took a walk through the town's old quarter. They passed a row of closed shops with dusty windows and another row of lively cafes and boutiques. Emma paused at one empty storefront and pressed her palm against the glass. "Imagine this," she whispered. Jaden crouched beside her and looked inside. Sunlight streamed through the front window onto cracked tile. He reached out and touched the cool glass. "It's perfect," he said. Emma smiled, heart fluttering. They made plans to ask the landlord about renting it. Jaden offered to accompany her. Emma felt safer with him by her side. That evening, they attended a small community dinner in the park. Long wooden tables were set under string lights, and townsfolk brought dishes to share. Emma carried a bowl of her famous potato salad. Jaden brought a dessert he'd baked, simple brownies with a crackled top. They greeted neighbors and friends. Emma's boss from the bookstore waved and introduced Jaden to the others as Emma's friend and business partner. Emma flushed with happiness. Jaden smiled warmly and shook hands, thanking them for coming. He listened to stories of the town's history and added a detail here and there that showed he'd taken time to learn. Emma felt proud to know him. After dinner, a few people gathered around the stage where a local storyteller spoke. Children sat cross-legged at the front, eyes wide. Emma and Jaden found a bench and watched the flames in the portable fire pit crackle. The storyteller told a tale of a lonely traveler who found home in an unexpected place. Akima glanced over at Jaden and saw tears in his eyes. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. He looked at her gratefully, and she smiled back. They walked home hand in hand under the glow of lanterns, feeling the warmth of community around them. On Saturday, Emma invited Jaden to visit her family's home in the suburbs. She was nervous. She cared for her family's opinions and hoped they would like him. Jaden arrived bearing a bouquet of daisies, Emma's favorite flower. Her mother opened the door, welcoming them with a hug. Her father nodded and shook Jaden's hand firmly. Over chicken soup and salad, they chatted about simple things: the neighborhood, Emma's childhood mischief, and Jaden's work. When Emma's little brother ran in asking about video games, Jaden bent down to answer and even agreed to play with him later. Emma's mother watched them and whispered quietly to Emma, "He's a keeper." Emma felt her smile slip into her heart. But later that afternoon, Jaden invited Emma to meet his sister at her apartment. He wanted her to feel included in his life too. Sister Sarah greeted them with homemade cupcakes, chocolate with pink frosting. She showed Emma old photos of Jaden as a boy, giggling at his first race, wearing a too-big suit at a school. "Play," Emma laughed with Sarah, feeling a bond form through shared laughter. Jaden's mother called from the kitchen, asking him to help with laundry. He walked back to fold shirts and joked with his mother about his new partner in crime. Emma watched him, her heart full. That night, Emma and Jaden sat on the balcony of his apartment building, looking out over the city lights. They shared one cupcake between them, feeding each other bites. The breeze was cool, and Emma leaned against him. He wrapped his arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "I feel at home with you," he said softly. Emma closed her eyes. Leaning into the moment, she whispered back, "Me too." Days later, Emma received a call from the landlord of the empty storefront. He offered her a short-term lease at a reasonable rate if she could start repairs within a week. Heart leaped. She called Jaden right away. He dropped everything and came to meet her at the store. Together, they walked through the empty space. Jaden measured each wall, while Emma imagined where the shelves would stand. They discovered a small back room, perfect for storage, and a front alcove, perfect for a reading nook. When they finished the tour, Emma turned to Jaden and hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you," she murmured. He hugged her back and said, "We'll do it together." They spent the next days painting walls and repairing windows. Emma mixed paint while Jaden sanded wood. His suit was replaced by old clothes splashed with color. Emma's hair fell in wisps around her face. Passers-by smiled at their energy. A neighbor brought them fresh lemonade. Another offered old books left over from a clearance sale. Each kindness reminded Emma of the day Jaden paid for her lunch. She thought about how that one act had changed her life, leading her to this moment of creation and hope. One afternoon, as they took a break sitting on a dusty shelf, Emma turned to Jaden. Her eyes sparkled with excitement and gratitude. "I never imagined my dream could come true so soon." He smiled and brushed a speck of paint from her cheek. "Your dream became ours," he said. She laughed and reached for his hand. Together they watched the empty store transform into something new. That night, sleeping in her small apartment, Emma dreamed of the grand opening. She saw the store, filled with friends, family, and neighbors, shelves heavy with books, the scent of tea drifting through the air. In her dream, Jaden stood beside her at the door, greeting the first customers with a welcoming smile. When she awoke, she knew their journey was only half complete. Their partnership, built on kindness and shared stories, would carry them through whatever challenges came next. And as she drifted back to sleep, she whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, we build our future." Days blurred into weeks as Emma and Jaden poured their hearts into the bookstore's makeover. Each morning they met at dawn beneath the dew-damp awning. Emma carried paint cans and brushes. Jaden balanced wooden planks and tools. Together they scrubbed walls until their arms burned, then painted long strokes of cream and sage green. The old floorboards creaked under Jaden's careful steps as he sanded them smooth. Emma swept up stray sawdust, slipping now and then on a pile of chips. They laughed at each small spill, bonding over imperfections that would soon become part of the store's charm. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm trapped them inside the nearly empty shop. Water dripped through a loose roof tile, splattering the fresh paint on the floor. Emma frowned, pulling out her phone to call the landlord. Jaden put a hand on her arm. "Let's try to fix it ourselves," he said. He climbed a ladder to reach the leak, while Emma passed him nails and sealant. As he sealed the tile, she held the ladder steady. They worked in silence, trusting each other's strength. When the drip stopped, they high-fived and cheered, feeling proud of their teamwork. As the opening day drew near, they set up oak shelves along the walls. Shelf held a promise. A row of classics here, a section of local authors there. Emma placed a small sign reading new arrivals beside the counter, and Jaden drilled a hook for hanging fairy lights above the reading nook. They arranged plush chairs and scattered cushions in soft colors. Near the window, Emma set a small table for tea, complete with a kettle and delicate cups. Jaden tested the water temperature and nodded approvingly. He even practiced making herbal tea, surprising Emma when he poured her a perfect cup one evening. Evenings became their favorite time. After long days of work, they sat on the stoop of the shop, watching streetlights flicker on. Emma leaned her head on Jaden's shoulder as he gently stroked her hair. They shared simple dinner's pizza slices. On a paper plate, warm bread dipped in olive oil eaten side by side amid paint cans and boxes of books. They spoke softly of hopes, not about the store alone, but about life together. Emma imagined quiet mornings reading by the fireplace in their future home. Jaden pictured evenings cooking dinner for Emma and hosting friends in a cozy living room. Their dreams grew entwined like the fairy lights above them. One morning, Emma woke to a knock at the door. She opened it to find her mother standing in the drizzle, arms crossed and eyes bright. Behind her stood a small group of Emma's friends, each holding a gift, a stack of children's books, a bouquet of wildflowers, a vintage lamp. Emma's mother stepped inside and looked around in wonder. "It's beautiful," she said. Emma led her through the shop, pointing out the reading nook and the shelves they had installed. Her friends chatted with Jaden, as if they'd known him for years. Emma watched, heart full, as the people she loved became part of her new world. After her mother left, Emma found Jaden arranging a row of cookbooks near the tea table. She slipped her arms around his waist and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." He turned and kissed her forehead. "I believe in us," he said. They stood in the soft glow of morning light, surrounded by the quiet promise of stories waiting to be told. The final week before opening was a whirlwind. They invited a local sign painter to carve the store's name in elegant script above the door. They printed bookmarks to hand out to first visitors, each with a small poem and their names and the date of opening. They tested every light bulb, polished every shelf, and swept the floor until it shone. Emma organized the grand opening event, a local author's reading followed by coffee and tea. Jaden helped her write invitations and post them around town. Emma placed a small chalkboard sign on the sidewalk. Grand opening this Saturday at 10 a.m. The night before the opening, they sat inside the dimmed shop, each holding a cup of chamomile tea. The rows of books stood silent but hopeful around them. "Okay." Emma looked at Jaden, her eyes shining. "Tomorrow, this place is alive," she said softly. Jaden smiled and reached for her hand. "It's already alive because of you," he replied. Emma squeezed his hand back, feeling tears fill her eyes. They sat together in silence, letting the weight of their work settle into peace. The opening day dawned clear and bright. Emma woke before the sun, her heart fluttering with excitement and nerves. She dressed in a simple blue dress and pinned her hair back. Jaden arrived with fresh pastries from the bakery, and they arranged them on a small table by the counter. As they unlocked the door, they stood side by side and held their breath. Emma flipped the sign to open, and Jaden greeted the first customer with a warm smile. Word had spread through the town like a gentle breeze. Soon, a steady stream of neighbors, friends, and curious passers-by entered. They smiled at the cozy interior, ran fingers along spines of beloved titles, and settled into chairs with steaming cups. Emma read poetry from the chalkboard and introduced Jaden as her partner. He waved shyly from behind the counter. Children sat cross-legged for story time, while teens browsed graphics novels and older patrons nodded in approval at the collection of historical memoirs. All afternoon, the shop buzzed with life, laughter, conversation, the rustle of pages. Emma floated from group to group, her cheeks flushed with joy. Jaden refilled teacups and helped children pick their favorite picture books. They worked seamlessly, instinct and trust guiding each other. At one point, a customer asked how such a lovely place came to be. Emma pointed to Jaden and said, "He paid for my lunch once, and that kindness built our dream." The customer nodded, touched by the story. Jaden smiled at Emma and she felt the warmth of gratitude from every corner of the room. As dusk settled and the last visitors left, Emma and Jaden stood in the quiet shop. The fairy lights glowed softly, and the pages of open books seemed to whisper goodnight. Emma leaned against the counter and asked, "Did it feel as real to you as it did to me?" Jaden stepped close and wrapped his arms around her. "More," he said. "Every moment today felt like pure magic." Emma pressed her cheek against his shoulder. She thought back to that very first rainy afternoon when kindness stepped off a rainy street and into her life. She whispered, "Thank you for that day and every day since." Jaden kissed the top of her head and said, "Thank you for saying yes to everything." They switched off the lights one by one until the shop was dark, save for the last glow of the fairy lights. Hand in hand, they walked out into the cool night, their steps echoing on the wet sidewalk. Together, they closed the door on an old chapter and stepped into the next ready for whatever story lay ahead. The morning of the proposal came gently, with a soft pink glow in the sky and birds calling in the trees. Emma woke early, her mind buzzing with the excitement of another day at the bookstore. She stretched and slipped on a light sweater, ready to greet customers and arrange new titles on the shelves. She felt the same warmth she had felt on opening day, the thrill of watching a dream come true. What she did not know was that today held a surprise she would never forget. Jaden arrived at the shop before sunrise, carrying a small box wrapped in pale blue paper. He set it behind the counter, arranging a single white rose beside it. His heart pounded as he thought about how Emma would react. He pictured her soft smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she found joy in a simple story. He remembered the first time he had seen her in the cafe, soaked by rain and too shy to admit she was hungry. He thought of how that small act of paying for her lunch had led them here, to a new life filled with books, love, and hope. When the bell over the door tinkled, Emma looked up, surprised to see Jaden cleaning the counter instead of getting coffee. He smiled and waved her over. "I thought I'd help today," he said lightly. Emma laughed and handed him a dustcloth. Together, they wiped down the shelves, joking about what color paint they would choose for the reading nook next winter. Emma felt happy and safe beside him. She did not suspect the box waiting just out of sight. At mid-morning, a steady stream of customers came in. Emma helped an elderly man find a biography he wanted. Jaden poured tea for a young student studying for exams. They worked side by side, moving in perfect sync as if they had known each other forever, which, in truth, they had, since that rainy day when kindness had brought them together. Through each interaction, Jaden's nervous excitement grew. He counted the minutes until the lunch hour, when he would carry Emma away for the surprise he had planned. As the clock hands crept toward 12, Jaden slipped out to the back room. He rechecked his tie in the small mirror and smoothed his hair. In his pocket lay a simple silver ring, delicate enough to tuck under a finger, but shining with promise. He thought about how they had built this bookstore together, painting walls and sanding floors, arranging books and making plans. He knew Emma's love for stories and how she believed each chapter of life held its own magic. Now he wanted to invite her into the most magical chapter of all. He returned to the shop floor just as Emma set down a stack of new arrivals. She looked around, noticing that lunchtime was quiet for once. "Jaden," she said, "do you want to step out for a bit? Thought we might grab a sandwich and then head to the park." He nodded, his smile bright but his heart pounding in his chest. He led her to the small cafe they had first met in, the place where fate had first intervened. Emma looked surprised but pleased. She slipped off her apron and tucked her hair behind her ear, her eyes soft with curiosity. The cafe felt warm and familiar. Jaden pointed to a corner table framed by a window. Emma took her seat and watched as he ordered 2 sandwiches and a pot of tea. As the barista brought their food, Emma sipped her tea and asked how his morning had been. He told her about a long audit call he had finished and thanked her for holding the store together. She laughed and said she could rely on him to make any day better. In truth, she meant much more than she could say. When their sandwiches arrived, Jaden leaned close. "I have something I want to share with you," he said quietly. Emma raised an eyebrow, smiling gently. "Oh," she said. "What is it?" He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers. He spoke of how her kindness had changed his life that day in the cafe, how it had lifted his spirits and given him hope when he needed it most. He told her he had fallen in love with the way she saw beauty in small things, a well-written page, the feel of a soft cushion, the taste of a simple meal shared with someone you care about. Emma's eyes misted as she listened. Jaden's voice was steady but full of emotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the blue-wrapped box. He set it on the table and opened it to reveal the silver ring inside. It was smooth, with a tiny engraving of an open book on its band. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. Jaden took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. "Emma," he said, his voice soft, "will you marry me?" The cafe around them faded in her vision. She saw only Jaden's hopeful eyes and felt the echo of every moment they had shared. She thought of the first lunch he had bought, of the rainy walk to her door, of the countless conversations over tea and the nights spent painting walls and arranging books. She thought of how he had shown her love in his steady kindness, and how he had become her partner in every sense. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled brightly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The small cafe erupted in applause from other patrons who had sensed something special was happening. Gently kissed her on the lips, and she felt her heart swell with joy. He slid his arms around her and held her close as if he never wanted to let go. They spent the rest of the afternoon sharing the news. Jaden called his family first. His sister Sarah squealed with delight, hugging her own phone. His mother cried happy tears and asked when she could meet Emma. Then Emma called her parents. Her mother laughed and declared they would host an engagement party as soon as possible. Her father said he was proud and relieved to welcome Jaden into the family. When they returned to the bookstore hand in hand, their faces still lit with excitement, friends and neighbors awaited them. A small crowd had gathered in front of the shop, balloons tied to the railing. Emma's best friend Lily rushed forward. With a bouquet of daisies, Jaden's colleague Marcus handed them a card with congratulations. Emma felt like the walls themselves were cheering for them. They decided to hold an impromptu celebration. Emma fetched more tea, and Jaden arranged pastries on a side table. Visitors came in one by one, offering hugs and warm wishes. A young couple who had recently moved to town asked for an engagement photo. Emma and Jaden stood together beneath the fairy lights, smiling for the camera. He kissed her cheek, and she leaned against him, feeling grateful for every person who had supported their journey. As the sun set, the bookstore glowed softly from within. Emma and Jaden stood outside, looking up at the sign they had painted. Together they thought back to that very first day, remembering how a simple act of kindness had led to building a bookstore, a partnership, and now an engagement. Emma rested her head on Jaden's shoulder and whispered, "I never thought buying lunch could change my whole life." He laughed and squeezed her hand. "Neither did I," he said, "but I'm so glad it did." Later that evening, when the last guest had left and the lights were dimmed, Emma and Jaden sat on the floor by the shelves, leaning against a stack of books. Emma turned the ring on her finger and marveled at its smooth shape. Jaden poured them, each a cup of tea, and they drank slowly, savoring the quiet. Emma said, "I love this chapter of our story." Jaden smiled. "And there are so many more chapters to write," he replied. They talked about their wedding plans, how they would save money by inviting friends to bring homemade dishes, how they would hold the ceremony in the garden behind the shop. They imagined their future home, a small house with a porch where they could sit and read in the evenings. They spoke of children someday, and of continuing to grow the bookstore into a thriving community space. As midnight approached, Emma yawned and leaned against Jaden. He picked her up gently and carried her upstairs to the small apartment above the shop. He tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Good night, my fiancé." "Oh, Emma smiled sleepily and murmured, "Good night, my love." In the soft darkness, Emma dreamed of pages turning and new stories waiting to be told. She dreamed of love that began with a simple lunch and grew into a lifetime promise. And as she slept, her heart was full, knowing that kindness had led her to a love deeper than any story she had ever read.